All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar. This is a webinar being held by Med School Coach and online med ed coaching. We have myself, my name is Joel Ramirez. It's not Craig Goldstein. I know it says that on my camp, but my name is actually Joel Ramirez. I'm our director of USMLE Complex and Medical School Tutoring. We have two of our amazing tutors joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, so I'm Peter White. I'm a recent graduate from Lake Erie College of Medicine. I also got a master's of medical education from there, and I'm going into orthopedic surgery at the Northwell Health System in New York.
Hi, my name is Lee. I am also a recent graduate of the Penn Medical School, Perlman School of Medicine, and I am going into pediatrics, and I'll be starting that next week at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
Awesome, thanks guys. And so these are two of our more experienced and veteran tutors. So we're really excited to hear from them and kind of hear about how they honored the majority of their self-exams, if not all their self-exams, and how they kind of prepared for difficult subjects on Step 2 CK. And so I want to go ahead and let you know right now that we are going to end the session with a question and answer session. So if you have questions, you can either hold on to them at the end, or you can actually submit them through GoToWebinar. And when you submit them, we'll get them, and we won't address them immediately, but they'll rack up and we'll get to them towards the end. And the end is specifically meant for a chance to kind of ask Peter and Lee some questions, so make sure you take advantage of that. So let's go ahead and get started. So here are our hosts. We had a chance to hear from everybody already. Let's get going. We're all here to help you score higher on these exams. We recognize at Med School Coach that these are very, very difficult exams. And not only are they difficult exams, they're very important exams. And so it is our mission to help you succeed on them. Let's go ahead and start with a question. It's going to be, what year in medical school are you? I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Go ahead and choose your answer, and then I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds to give us a sense of how many people and who are in attendance today. All right. So it looks like the majority of students here are going to be third-year students. It makes sense. We're talking about how to do well on shelf exams and how to beat Step 2 CK. Excellent. So let's go ahead and get started with kind of a brief introduction overview. This is what we're going to be covering today. We are going to talk a little briefly about Step 2 CK. What are shelf exams? Are they important? We're going to talk about tips and tricks for studying while you're on a rotation. And then Peter and Lee are actually going to walk through the highest yield and what we think are the most important resources for each shelf exam. So Step 2 CK, a majority of people here are going to be third-year or fourth-year students, so most people have taken Step 1. It's very similar, except it's 1 hour longer and one more block. So when everyone who's taken Step 1 is leaving the testing site, unfortunately, you'll still be there with an hour left to go. Passing score for us is going to be a 209. This is a graph from Step 1. It's about the same distribution, slightly shifted over to the right. So a 230 on Step 2 does not equal a 230 on Step 1. A 230 on Step 1 equals something about a 223 on Step 2. So it's a little skewed to the right. We're going to go ahead and launch our next poll. How important do you think Step 2 CK is for residency selection? I know a lot of people talk about Step 1. And everyone's talking about Step 1, and everyone's pretty aware that Step 1 is the exam. What do we think about Step 2 CK? Great. So I think the majority of people will agree that it's important. So pretty much everyone except for 6% says that it's either somewhat or very important. And it's kind of, we want to send a message to you that is definitely very important. And as residency selection gets more and more competitive and schools move from graded preclinical courses to pass-fail or even pass-fail third-year core clerkships, these exams are going to become more and more important. which, if you're a good test taker, can be a strength. If you're not, then it can be a big challenge. So this is going to be a result of a survey from program directors. It's a selection of all specialties, so not just one, but all specialties, and essentially was looking at the different characteristics that program directors looked at when they're choosing their applicants to interview. Step 2 CK was the fourth highest aspect. So you have step one is king, letters of recommendation, your MSPE, and then step 2 CK. In fact, step 2 CK is above your personal statement. So program directors still care more about this number than unfortunately what you're saying in your personal statement. So it is very important. So I think myself, Lee, and Peter actually just went through the entire application cycle of the residency. So kind of our perspective on why these scores are so important and what they can do for you. You obviously submit a lot of things with your residency application. You have personal statements, you have all these honors, awards, and scholarships, you have letters, some of you will have research and publications. The thing is, STEP scores are very easy to filter by, and they're very objective. They're normalized across all the universities, and it's really easy for a program director. This is actually a slide from a program director's webpage. They can actually log in, and they can simply hit sort by step 1 score, and they can hit sort by step 2 CK score. So when you have hundreds, if not thousands of applications, it's very easy just to hit that button, start from the top, and start making your way down. And so it's our goal to make sure that you are towards the middle or towards the top, and that you are not going to get filtered out of residency application based upon this number, which is not actually reflecting your ability to be a physician.
Joel,
our last poll.
Yeah. Joel, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to let you know that it looks like we're having a lot of questions. There's some technical difficulties with showing the PowerPoint.
I see. I'm not able to see. Can't see the slides. Oh. Are you able to see the slides there, Peter?
I'm not either. No. I was able to.
Were we able to earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. How about now?
No.
Okay. Now?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, and at the beginning of the presentation, were you able to see them?
No.
Okay. Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. We're going to go ahead and continue on here. We'll go ahead and move on from here. Sorry about that. Luckily, you didn't miss out on too much. So we moved through our poll. We moved through here. We moved through, okay, our last poll. So our last poll, how important do you think that grades are for residency selection? And I'll go ahead and launch that as well. Great. So I think this one's a little more across the board versus our other questions. I think most people agree that it's important, but there's a lot of people that think that it's either less important or neutral. So this is results from the same exact survey that I showed previously, which if you missed the slide, this is a survey of program directors that essentially rating the most important things that program directors think are for selecting applicants to interview for their residency. And we'll see here that step 2 CK was number 4. We'll see that grades and clerkship are actually number 6. So the number 1 is step score, step 2 CK is the 4th highest, and then grades and required clerkships are the 5th. So telling us that it's still very important. So I'm going to talk about these 3 things before letting Peter and Lee kind of share their perspective. First is going to be what are self-exams. Are self-exams important, and tips and tricks for studying while on clinical rotation. So what are self-exams? Self-exams are going to be subject-specific exams. They're about 100 to 110 questions long, and they're about anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours. They're written by MDMEs, so they are actually very reflective of what step 2 CK is like, and they're typically taken at the end of a core clinical clerkship. So you'll go through the clerkship, and at the end, you'll take this test. It's almost like a final exam for a clinical clerkship. All these exams are not only subject-specific, but they're really focusing on the clinical aspects of each subject and really focusing on preparing you for Step 2 CK. Are these shelf exams important? And the short and easy answer is yes, absolutely. So these shelf exams are usually linked to your grades for the clinical clerkship, and there's often a cutoff required to score an honors or a high pass. So for example, a lot of schools will say you need to score at least in the 80th percentile in order to, on the shelf exam, in order to even qualify for an honors grade. So not performing well on the shelf exam can actually prevent you from doing well on your clinical clerkship, which is kind of a shame because clinical clerkships are your opportunity to shine as a human and your opportunity to show your ability to communicate others and provide passionate care, which is really what a physician is all about. And so if you cannot meet this cutoff, unfortunately, that will not be directly displayed in your exam. They're also both predictors of performance on Step 2 CK and amazing preparation for Step 2 CK. All of the subjects that you're going to be working through on these shelf exams are going to show up on Step 2 CK. So if you study for these shelf exams and you perform well in these shelf exams, you're going to be well prepared for Step 2 CK, and you are likely are going to do better on Step 2 CK than if you were struggling through your shelf exams. So they're very important, and preparing for them are very important. Tips and tricks for studying well on rotations. I think that this is very challenging, and I think that the clinical world is very different than the preclinical world. And learning kind of clinical medicine while also studying can be very difficult. And so it's very different than the preclinical curriculum. And so I think everyone has a different approach to this. I think the things that we mentioned here are probably useful across the board. So number one, read and study a little bit every single day. You're going to be working all day in the hospital and you're going to be working really hard. You're going to get up early. You're probably going to be staying pretty late. It's going to be stressful and challenging. But you want to make sure that you read a little bit every day. This is kind of a slow and steady wins the race situation. It is not going to be so much like preclinical when you have an exam in 2 or 3 days and you get to study for 12 hours each day, because you won't be able to do that because you'll be showing up to the hospital. So try to block out an hour, at least an hour every day, to sit down and read. Obviously work hard. This takes kind of discipline to show up and work all day in the hospital and then come home and read. So try to stay disciplined. Try to stay committed to reading a little bit every day, and it's going to make the whole year a lot better for you. And use your time efficiently. So when you're studying, if you take a bus or a shuttle to the hospital every day, try to do some reading while you're on the shuttle. If there's downtime in the hospital, try to do some reading while you're in the hospital. Try to take your notes on some sort of mobile device or some sort of online platform like Evernote, where you can take notes and you can review them at the hospital or at home. During your third year, you're not always going to get the opportunity to just sit down and study for 3 or 4 hours on end. So you really need to try to find the time when it's available. And as a third year medical student, sometimes that's sporadically through the day. And you really want to use a combination of resources. So this is kind of what our webinar is going to focus on and what Peter and Lee are going to have a chance to talk about. There are many, many more resources for Step 2 CK than there are for Step 1. And the quality of resources for the shelf exams in Step 2 CK is much more variable than the quality for Step 1. So you want to use multiple resources in the sense of you want to use books, videos, question banks, and interactive modules like online med-ed, but you want to at the same time stay directed. Don't get lost going through 8 different things and getting through a few pages of each, because that's really not going to help you. Try to select 2 or 3 resources which differ. So maybe one book, a set of videos, and then a question bank, and use them together and use them to complement each other. And so I'm going to go ahead and move forward and pass it on to Lee, who's going to talk about some of these resources, followed by Peter.
Great. So hi, my name is Lee, like we said, and I'm going to be talking about the pediatrics, medicine, OBGYN, and neurology clerkships. So the PEDS shelf exam is notoriously difficult, and this is because PEDS encompasses a really wide range of pathologies. In particular, there are some weird diseases like inborn errors of metabolism, rare congenital and genetic defects, things that are kind of complicated and difficult to learn, and also that you're unlikely to see on your actual rotation. So there are things that you really, ideally you get most of the knowledge that you need for the shelf exam from your clinical rotations, but unfortunately particularly for pediatrics, you know, a lot of those things that do come up on the shelf are just not things that have very few cases per year, even in the US. So you're not going to be able to see them. So you really need to supplement with some other things. So UWorld is a great resource. In general, studying for clerkships, similar to on step 1, UWorld is really going to be your best friend. So the peds, there's a good number of pediatric UWorld questions, and it's very important to go through all of those questions, you know, time them out so you're doing a few per day, making sure that you get through them and then have a chance to review your incorrect answers. And your clerkship experiences are also going to be really important because that's kind of the way that you'll really solidify your knowledge, with the caveat that sometimes what you see on the wards is not necessarily what the exam wants you to say for when you're answering a question. So it's really important to make sure that when you see something when you're on the wards, that you go home and then read about it in your supplemental materials to make sure that you're not learning something that's going to lead you to the wrong answer on the exam. So I would say that adding, in addition to UWorld and learning from your, you know, from your preceptors and things like that, from the notes you take there, for other sources, you should probably use one of these two that I've listed here. So if we're talking, like Joel was saying, if you really are someone who likes to learn by reading, who needs to kind of supplement with reading materials, then BRS Pediatrics is pretty much the gold standard. You can sit down and read it cover to cover if you want to, or if you're more of a person who likes to do things more sporadically, just kind of covers things as you see them on the wards, but then you can kind of use it to supplement your own learning. Or if you notice something on UWorld that you're getting a lot of questions wrong on, you can supplement it with BRS. Or you can read the whole thing cover to cover, take notes in the margins. That's also a great way to do it. For pediatrics, there are a lot of UWorld questions, but if you're feeling like you need another question bank, if you're someone who really learns by answering questions, then Pretest Pediatrics is a great resource. The whole Pretest series is generally pretty good for subjects where you don't have quite as many practice questions to go through. So this has 500 USMLE style. They're generally a little bit shorter than the UWorld questions, but pretty well mimic the ones that you would get on your step 2 exam. And it has very detailed explanations, pretty similar to UWorld. So if you feel like you've done a lot of questions, but you want more of that test taking practice, and that's the way you learn, then Pretest Pediatrics is a great supplement as well. All right, so then the medicine shelf. This is sort of the mother of all shelves. The internal medicine encompasses a huge amount of information, and which is both very daunting when you're taking this shelf, but also really good if you're doing it earlier in the year, because having studied medicine will help you in virtually all of your other subjects, maybe with the exception of pediatrics. But for the most part, if you studied internal medicine, it will help you with all of your other subjects. So while it's a real drag to study for it, you can feel like you're studying for all of your exams rather than just one. The best resource by far is UWorld. There are 1,300 medicine UWorld questions. Luckily, this is usually one of the longer rotations, so you have more time to get through them. But in general, you really want to make sure you get through those medicine questions and make sure you do it with time to review at least some of the ones you got wrong. You might not be able to review all of them. But UWorld is really going to be your best friend. And then to supplement your UWorld, sort of the Bible of the medicine clerkship is Step Up to Medicine. So Step Up to Medicine, you can sort of think of like first aid for the USMLE Step 1. It's sort of it's the book that really has a very comprehensive amount of information. You know, it complements UWorld in that there are some, you know, rarer things that come up in UWorld that aren't in Step Up, but using the two synergistically is the best way to learn the information that you need. I would say that the best way to use Step Up is to annotate it, because just reading a book cover to cover can, you know, we all can kind of zone out when we're doing it, particularly again after waking up at 5 to go to the hospital. And there also are clinical correlates in the margins that are pretty key and things that can be pretty high yield and come up on shelf exams quite a bit. So making sure that you pay attention and you use Step Up wisely rather than just sort of like letting your eyes roll across the page without actually absorbing it, like any strategies for that can be really helpful. So that's a pretty easy one because those are the two, like if you have those two, you don't need anything else. And I don't recommend any other question banks besides UWorld. You have 1,300 questions. You definitely don't need any more than that. So the OBGYN clerkship, the shelf exam is actually a little bit easier when you compare it to something like internal medicine or pediatrics, in that since you're mostly focused on one organ system, there's kind of a finite amount of information as opposed to the medicine shelf, which can ask essentially anything. So UWorld is going to be a good resource here again, but there aren't quite as many UWorld questions. So you're definitely going to want to supplement your UWorld. It won't be enough on its own. Blueprints Obstetrics and Gynecology is a book that that I certainly used on my clerkship and that people really respond to. It's a, I definitely recommend reading it start to finish. It's a little less dense than some of the other review books that you'll see. And again, highlighting it, annotating it, just doing a little bit each page. It's only like this thick as opposed to some of the other ones. So it's not impossible to read. You can probably get through it relatively early on in your clerkship. And it's also really good as a reference material to look at when you're looking at your UWorld questions. In addition to that, there are also about 100 practice questions at the end. They're not really the USMLE style questions, which are, obviously the longer ones, but it is still good just kind of as a review to make sure that you absorb the information in the book, and it can give you a good idea of the things that you need to go back and look at more. And the last one I'm going to talk about is neurology. So neurology is kind of a rough one because all of neurology is actually part of the internal medicine curriculum. So to find the internal medicine, so that means you have to study neurology to study for your medicine clerkship. It's obviously less important than when you're studying for the neurology shelf, but those questions are part of the internal medicine question bank. It's part of those 1,300 questions. So for that reason, it gets a little bit complicated to do the UWorld questions. Particularly if you're someone who's trying to save money by sharing a question bank with someone else, because if you've already done medicine, you need to kind of hit the reset button so that you can get those neurology questions back. And sometimes that's not possible. So I would encourage you to do the UWorld questions, but I know that can get a little bit complicated because they live within the internal medicine question bank. But they are very good neurology questions. There aren't quite as many of them as there are for many other subjects. So for that reason, you might want to supplement with another question bank. So the American Academy of Neurology has its own question bank that's really good. Some schools buy a subscription to this for you, but I know like mine didn't, but it only costs $25 and it gets you 100 questions. And they're questions written by the American Academy of Neurology. So you can be pretty sure that they're good questions, which they are. There is also, again, the Pretest Neurology book, which has, like, it's similar to in pediatrics, 500 USMLE style questions. So those they're a little bit more, they mimic the shelf exam a little bit more than the AAN question bank questions do. So those can be a really good resource as well. Again, if you want to supplement or if for whatever reason you can't access the neurology questions. And then in terms of a book, Blueprints Neurology is a great book as well. It goes through neurology in a way that is very logical, and it really helps you with important subjects like going through neurology. Unfortunately requires a lot of memorization and a lot of anatomy, even though it's step 2 or shelf exams, the anatomy should be less important. Unfortunately, it is for neuro, and Blueprints Neurology gives you really good neuroanatomy review, which is going to be super important.
Great, thanks, Lee. Before we move on to Peter, there are a few people asking questions about whether this is recorded or not. It will be recorded, and it's going to be posted to the Med School Coach YouTube channel. So if you missed the first few minutes or you missed the first half or whatever, it will be available online. And I'll go ahead and let you take it from here, Peter.
All right, thank you, Joel. So again, my name is Peter. I'm going to be talking about the surgery, psych, family medicine shelves. And finally, I see a lot of you have been asking questions about what about when it comes to step 2 boards, how does this all step together? I'll kind of help bring that home for you. So for the surgery shelf is really not questions about doing surgeries per se. So it's not the pimp fodder that you'll hear in the ORs or you'll get on the floors or stuff like that. It's mostly internal medicine. What they want you to know is really the indications for surgery, the indications for different procedures, and big time, the surgical complications. Things like a PE and how you manage those in the various different types of ways are probably more high yield than knowing what kind of sutures you use in different cases. Those kind of questions don't come up. So when you're reviewing your material, those are the things you want to ask yourself. When do people go to surgery? And basically, what are the complications? And what are the things that any doctor, whether it's internal medicine, emergency medicine, or a surgical physician would see? For resources for this, there's only 150 questions in UWorld, which is not a lot compared to the other fields, so there's no excuse for not doing them, simply. They are very high yield, and they show up again, time and time again. But after you get through those, you can kind of start to use that time to focus on some of the other subjects that are very high yield surgically, such as GI, which is a lot of general surgery. Cardiology can get it integrated too, pulmonology. Surgery really does integrate a lot of these different different topics. So it's really important to be well-rounded. With regards to specific resources, there are several. In my experience, I found that online med ed in pretty much every clerkship actually gave a pretty good run through in the general basis and foundation for most of the clerkships. And then from there, there are different, like Joel was mentioning earlier, you can pick pretty much one supplemental resource to help fill in the blanks. One of the books that I found most people like the most, because it's very short, but it's also very high yield and to the point, is Dr. Pestana's Surgery Notes. It's about 130 pages, but literally every page and every paragraph is gold. Everything shows up on the board, on the shelf exam and the board. So it's really kind of the big things to know. There's also the Di Virgilio book, which is huge. It's about 700 pages. And at least in my experience, when you're getting there pre-rounding at 4:30 in the morning and not getting out until 11 p.m. at night, you don't really have time for that. Some people I know have liked it and used it, but just a little bit more high yield and to the point is Dr. Pestana's. And I think for all of the clerkships in general, it's really important to do the practice NBME exams. To just get a feel, they're all purchased through they're like $20 through the NBME's website, but they really help you get a feel for what what the questions are they're asking. So even if you do one earlier on in your clerkships, it helps you to get a feel for what to expect for that.
And for the blue Di Virgilio book as well, I think it is really long. At the back, there's several questions which are okay, but it can also be useful to kind of get an additional set of questions if you're looking for some more surgery questions.
Definitely. For the psych, it's pretty much kind of the same run through. Online med ed is going to be kind of a good gold standard. Psych is actually one of those interesting subjects where you probably in your first or second year, you come in that, one chapter in first aid actually covers a lot of the material which shows up in the clerkship. The only difference is at this point, depending on when you took step 1, they did change over to DSM-5 somewhat. So some of the definitions have changed very slightly, but it's important to kind of more refresh on that. And they do take it to one step further, kind of focusing more on risk factors and, integrating more of the pharmacology as you would. So the major book that kind of shows up for this that pretty much everyone uses across the board is First Aid for the Psychiatry Clerkship. It's a book, again, it's not that long, so it's easily readable 2 to 3 times on your clerkship, but it really does break things out a little bit more. And it really helps to drive down the actual criteria for DSM-5, which you don't really have in many of the other resources. For example, First Aid for Step 1 kind of gives you all the nice mnemonics, which are great, but it doesn't actually tell you some of the more specific things that can show up on the shelf exam. So when you're kind of going through the chapters in that, it's important to kind of look for and highlight some of the key points that show up, like the timelines for the different schizophrenia disorders, or whatever it is based on whatever chapter it is. And that can help really, hit the key points for what you need to know there. One of the things that I found also to be really helpful for this was the Online Med Ed has a quick tables book. For me, I found that a lot of this psych, because I didn't really have a great experience in my first 2 years with the psych course, it was a lot of just route memorization and trying to get down the basics. And for me, I found the spaced repetition to be very helpful. And the quick tables books overall encompasses every subject, but in my experience, it was very, very, very helpful for the psychiatry shelf. And again, I can't understate this enough, the NBME practice exams are huge. Psych as well. So for family, the family shelf is, depending on when you take it, can be either very hard or very easy. It's basically like a mini step 2 CK, because everything can show up. Family is one of those weird subjects where family medicine doctors encounter everything, and wherever you are in the country, some family medicine doctors deliver babies, some don't, depending on what's going on. So they really integrate everything on this shelf. So if you take it early, good luck, you got a lot ahead of you. If you take it later on, you're going to be more well-versed. For resources, there really, at least in my experience, nothing that's really great for it. There is a case files for family medicine book that some people like. Case files wasn't for me, but it does work for some people. There is a chapter in Step Up that focuses on ambulatory medicine, which is great. And there is also a question bank that some schools get access through for the American Academy of Family Physicians. That can sometimes get a little bit too much into the minutia as well. So it's really kind of finding a good balance. I think that the best way to kind of go through it is, focus on the internal medicine stuff, but try to think of it from an outpatient twist and the little differences that you'd see from whether or not you're in the emergency medicine versus outpatient clinic. For example, if you have a patient coming in with chest pain and you're in a emergency room, you're going to order, EKG and troponins. You don't do troponins in the outpatient setting. And those are the kind of differences that they want you to be able to tease out. So, reapproaching the internal medicine subjects from that standpoint is really helpful to kind of drill that out. Again, like I said, taking it later in the year is the best possible thing you can do. Some schools let you do that, some schools don't, and you kind of have to deal with that. And because it is integrative as much as possible, the best way to prepare for this shelf is going to be to do better and as well as you can on all the other shelves in general. And then when it comes time for step 2, probably the most important thing that you can do when you get to your dedicated study time is putting together a comprehensive review schedule. I'm sure all three of us can probably speak to experiences where we've done that with students and the importance of that, because it helps keep you on track and really set your goals for the day and how to get through it. I've seen a couple questions in there about asking about master the boards and secrets. It's really good to pick one or two specific content resources, whether or not that's online med ed or if you've done that thoroughly, to do a master the boards or secrets, because each time you see these things in different ways, it's going to help build on that foundation and help lay everything down. Again, I'm sure you've all noticed that we keep hounding you about doing UWorld as you go through your clerkships. This is your time to reset the bank and really test to see how much you know and to see if you're remembering the concepts you learned, or identify those subjects that you need to go back to and spend time with. When it comes time to evaluating and assessing where you're at, for those of you who have been through the step 1 process, the NBMEs are basically what you do. They give you the best idea of where you're at. For step 2, the more predictive value comes in the UWorld assessments. And I know most people find that the average of how they do on those is pretty close to how they end up doing on that. So that's going to be kind of what you're going to want to put in, a week or two before your test. And again, the big thing is to make sure that you honor all your clerkships so you're best prepared for step 2.
Great, thanks, Peter. So I'm going to just go ahead, and we're running behind. I want to make sure we get an opportunity to answer your questions. So I will briefly mention how one-on-one tutoring can fit in and help you out here. I think one of the benefits of getting one-on-one tutoring is really getting a personalized experience. It's having somebody who is an expert on the exam sit across from you and help understand what kind of learner you are, what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and then help make a personalized study plan to help you get from A to Z and help you get the score that you need. We can essentially help with everything. We help identify resources. We help create study plans. We help with content review. We help with test taking strategies. All of our tutors are experienced with the whole breadth of A to Z and are not only experienced with it, but have also worked with several students and have kind of perfected different strategies on doing well for these exams. I'll move through this. If you are interested in tutoring from Med School Coach, which is also online med ed coaching, you can go ahead and go online. You can Google us and you could read more information, but I would like to move forward so we can get to our questions. Also, right now, Online Med Ed is offering a discount for 1 month's trial for their premium, and they're also now offering a new whiteboard book, which is now half price. So you can go ahead and get Dustin's book of whiteboards essentially blown up with areas where you can write your own notes. So essentially have all these diagrams you can add to your diagrams. So it's something new that Online Med Ed is offering. So to get to some of our questions, I think there are a lot of excellent questions here. So it's going to be hard to choose them, but we're going to essentially start from the top and try to get through as many as we can. There are a few questions about international medical graduates. The question is, what about IMGs, or is there anything different you should do for IMGs? And I think none of us specifically have that experience, but we have worked with several students who are international medical graduates. And I think the most important thing is that there's just a little more pressure. And what that means is that you just need to make sure you're spending a little more time with your extra resources, and make sure that you're being particularly disciplined when you're studying for your clinical clerkships. So when you're in the hospital, when you get home, make sure that you're being very disciplined about spending that 1 to 2 hours studying, because your clinical grades are going to be very, very important. And these resources that Lee and Peter mentioned, they're available to everybody. And so utilizing them the most correct way is going to be helpful for everybody. So I think the biggest tip is just to be a bit more disciplined and make sure that you're spending the time to identify the quality resources, and then make sure that you're going through them. This is a one question I'll send your way, Peter. Is there any kind of supplemental information to get to learn MSK, or to get help with your MSK?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot, simply, but probably the basis of your MSK is going to be, first off, knowing the anatomy, because that's what they want you to know on the boards. So even just going back to whatever anatomy book and going through, your rotator cuff muscles and the different physical exam tests that they get you, that's going to be the big thing for you. So if you have a history and physical book, I'm not familiar with one exactly per se, but that would be really helpful for you. Again, and you can also look at the first aid for step 1 little MSK section, which is also very helpful for that. Again, just when it comes to MSK on step 2, in general step 2, the questions are all about basically history and physical exam and how that leads to the diagnosis. So if you can think, when you get an MSK question, about how this patient is going to come see you in the office and what they're going to tell you, oh, I'm having difficulty raising my shoulder, and kind of focus in on what rotator muscle that's going to be, that'll help kind of integrate it a little bit more to help make it stick, if that helps. But unfortunately, there isn't, again, a great comprehensive resource, but I would go back to first aid for step 1 for the most board specific stuff.
Great. And this question I'll actually give to you, Lee. It says, would you recommend step 2 CK first aid?
I would recommend the Step 2 CK first aid book for questions if you would like to do additional questions in addition to UWorld. I think that in terms of the first aid for the Step 2 CK, I think it can be a good reference. I don't think it's a great use of time to read that book start to finish, because I think you'll wind up going through a lot of information that you might already know, or going through things that it just might not be the best use of your time. But I would say there is one book that goes system by system and has questions. So if you're someone who goes through all the clerkships and then you reset your UWorld questions, and when you go back, you find that you just remember the answers to a lot of the UWorld questions rather than, actually seeing them so almost like seeing them for the first time, then I think that the Step 2 CK first aid question book can be a great resource for additional question help.
I see a few questions here about Anki. So a few folks are wondering why we haven't mentioned Anki, and then there are questions of, do you recommend pre-made Anki decks for Step 2 CK? So I think there's a few things to say here. So the first question is why we haven't mentioned it. So I think preparing for your shelf exams and preparing for Step 2 CK is very different from Step 1, in the sense of Step 1, you usually have at least 4 to 6 to 8 weeks of dedicated study time. And then you have a preclinical curriculum before that. So you could even start studying your preclinical curriculum. When you're preparing for shelf exams, you usually have 6 to 8 weeks for each self exam. And you're usually in the hospital at least 50 to 60 hours each week. And so I think the time commitment it takes to make Anki cards and to regularly review them ends up being an inefficient use of your time for Step 2 CK. And your time, instead of spending the time making the cards and then reviewing the cards every single day, your time would probably be better spent doing other things, such as reading the resources mentioned or doing question banks. As far as pre-made Anki decks, it's kind of my personal recommendation to never utilize a pre-made Anki deck, and there's a few reasons for that. The first is these Anki decks were made by other people, and they're not specific to what is hard for you. So what you're going to get is a lot of cards that are not necessarily useful for you, and that's going to be a big time sink. If you're looking at a deck that's 10,000 cards, to go through that and to review that regularly and the way you're supposed to review it is nearly impossible, and if not impossible, a very inefficient use of your time, when out of those 10,000 cards, maybe only 500 or 1,000 cards are going to be useful to you. So I don't think that that is a good use of your time. Additionally, I think if you want to use Anki, I think Anki is a great resource for step 1 and can be a decent resource for step 2 if you have enough time to study for it. Is making the actual cards for yourself is a very good learning experience. So when you make the cards, you're going through your material, you are identifying what is difficult for you, what is challenging for you, you're synthesizing that information, and then you're putting it into a card. So that in itself is a very active process, which is helping you learn versus just taking, downloading a 10,000 card Anki deck and working through it, which I believe is a very inefficient use of your time. Lee, I'll give you this question. What do you think of Master the Boards, and how do you think it compares to Step Up to Medicine, if you've gone through it?
So I actually haven't gone through Master the Boards, so I don't have any firsthand experience with that. From what I have heard from other people who did use Master the Boards, I think that in general, people seem to like Step Up to Medicine a little bit better, but I did not personally use it, so I can't say that firsthand.
So
Peter,
I actually
did you use Master the Boards? Cool.
I used both.
Cool.
And I can tell you, I hated Step Up to Medicine. That was just me, and I think that kind of speaks to everyone has their own resources. And one of the hardest parts when you get to these clerkships is being able to find what works for you and what works for you quickly. And you got to find, if it doesn't work, switch it out, try something else, and do that as soon as you can so you can really master one resource. I liked Master the Boards come dedicated time because I found it took everything one step further for what I had seen. And I found that really a little bit more beneficial compared to Step Up, which was a little bit more of, bullet points, where Master the Boards was literally more like a book. So in my opinion, I found it to be more useful for me, but I don't read well with bullet points. So whatever works for you, simply.
Lee, I'll go ahead and send you this one. Do you have any comments on using other question banks such as USMLE RX and AMBOSS in addition to UWorld or any of the other question banks?
So I think that it's all about how you want to split up your time. So I think that particularly for the shelf exams where you have fewer questions available. So essentially not medicine for sure, because medicine you have 1,300 UWorld questions, and UWorld is always the best resource. But if you are if you are someone who learns by doing questions, which like for me, I definitely am. If you are someone who wants more questions, I think supplemental question banks can be really helpful. I have heard very good things about the AMBOSS question bank, and in terms of other question banks, there is that, again, subject-specific ones like American Academy of Neurology. I didn't mention this on the slide, but the ACOG also has one that they use for the OBGYN clerkship that my school paid for the students to get, and that one was very beneficial as well. Or using those books like the case the case files books do have some questions, but using like the Pretest books as well can also be really helpful. So I think that, again, medicine is a special case because there are all those UWorld questions, but I would definitely not let another question bank take precedence over UWorld. I would make sure you get through UWorld, and then if you're still feeling like you need more questions, then to supplement.
And for Peter, if someone did poorly on the surgery shelf exam, is there anything that they can do differently to prepare for the surgery portions of Step 2 CK?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing would be because as I kind of mentioned, the heart of the surgery shelf is medicine, right? So when you kind of look back on that shelf, you got to kind of look back to see what you felt weak about. Was it the GI and understanding the differences between the different, gallbladder disorders, or is it, you kind of have to do some introspective thinking and say why, simply, and then use that as an area to focus on and hit that early in your studying. When it comes to board prep, a lot of it is, in general, identifying where you're weak, which is really a hard thing to do because inherently all of us in medicine are proud people and we want to be, as good as we can be. But you gotta look to yourself and say why, and then go and hit that early. Don't be scared to go after what you don't know, and that'll kind of knock it down as soon as you can.
Great. So another question, I'll go ahead and take this one. Is any recommendations for review of imaging modalities, X-ray, CT, MRI? So I found Google Images and Radiopedia just to be super useful. And so I think I always recommend students when they are going through questions or when they're going through content, if they're reading about diseases, or there's some sort of mention of imaging findings in a question stem, so a question stem describes findings on a chest X-ray, then after going through the question, Google the disease and chest X-ray. So if they're describing, patchy hazy opacities on a chest X-ray, once you get through that question, Google patchy hazy opacities chest X-ray and start to make the correlations between how images are described and what they actually look like. And same thing with CTs. So when you're reading about appendicitis, and they say diagnose appendicitis with a CT, when you're done with that question, Google, appendicitis, CT. And if you get in the habit of doing that regularly, you're going to get a chance to look to see a wide range of different pathologies on a wide range of different forms of radiology like X-rays and CTs. And I think doing that while you're studying is a very useful way to identify these. And if you do it while you're studying, then you're really integrating the concepts and you're really linking them. So next time you see something that looks like appendicitis on a CT, you'll remember it because you'll remember that question stem where you talked about appendicitis. Let's see, another question for us. So this one is going to be a more general question, and I'll give this to you, Peter. When you are going through your clerkship, your clinical clerkship, for your free weekend, should you spend it studying or should you spend the time kind of rejuvenating and on personal time?
Oh, that's the tough one. It really depends, and it really depends on what clerkship you're on, what you're trying to do, how well you're doing, and what you have going on in family life. In general, balancing everything is just so hard, and especially when you're on something that's time demanding as surgery. And I think this kind of goes to what, Joel, you were speaking about earlier. If you can get enough studying done during the day or while you're on the move, you can kind of afford that rejuvenating time. But if you're somebody who needs to sit down and actually, sit at a desk and take that dedicated time just to study, you're going to have to, spend a little bit more time away. I think, especially on these demanding rotations with so much going on, it's really important to get that, rejuvenation and get that stress relief. Because if you don't, you're going to get bogged down in an emotional hellhole. But you got to, I think the biggest thing is finding the time throughout the day to get some studying in. And that balance, I don't think anyone's really ever figured it out fully. So it's kind of figure out what works for you.
And this kind of gets back to what we mentioned earlier. If you're in a position where you need to do better, then maybe that is your opportunity to kind of just to shine and to kind of get ahead if that's what you need. I'm going to send this next question to you, Lee. It's about step up to medicine. And do you think it's beneficial when you're preparing for Step 2 CK to try to sit down and read Step Up to Medicine cover to cover before moving on to other resources like UWorld?
No, is the short answer. I think that when you're studying for Step 2 CK, given that you've already done all of your clerkships and you've already taken all of the shelf exams, I think that UWorld should really take precedence because now you're dealing with the entire bank of UWorld questions. So it's over 2,000 questions, and that should really take precedence. I think that Step 2, for a Step Up to Medicine, I mean, people have very differing opinions about it. It is written in bullet point form. I liked that as opposed to reading words because I thought it mimics more like my note-taking strategy. But people always have different opinions about it. It's a really polarizing book. I think that in terms of reading it start to finish, I think that your time is better served to use it as a reference text for things that you feel like you're less strong on. So because it does contain a lot of like somewhat low yield material in addition to all the high yield material, and medicine is the bulk of the questions that you're going to get on the, or probably like the plurality of the questions that you're going to get on step 2 CK, but it isn't all the questions. So things that are low yield for the medicine shelf are going to be very low yield for your for step 2 CK. So you're better off kind of figuring out what you don't know and specifically targeting those topics rather than spending your time reading through a whole book that might wind up not coming up on your exam, or reading through parts that aren't going to come up on your exam.
Great. Another question is, how would you use online med-ed for step 2 preparation? And so I think one of the best parts of online med-ed is their videos, and so you get to watch videos of Dustin describing different things and then writing on a whiteboard, making diagrams. And so I think that that's a really great opportunity to have a video resource. So you can have a book resource, you can have videos for particularly challenging subjects, and then you could be doing your questions every day. So I think that it not only can supplement a book, but it also can be your one resource. So if you are working really hard on a really important clerkship and you don't have much time, and then I think it's reasonable to just watch online med-ed videos and go through their notes and essentially utilize their notes as a form of textbook, and then do a question bank as well. I will give you this one, Peter. How relevant are the shelf MBME practice exams for step 2 CK prep?
For CK prep, well, I can tell you for shelf exam prep, they are gold. You see some of literally the verbatim questions that show up, on the shelves themselves. So definitely do them for the shelves. For when it comes actually for the CK, the subject-specific exams, I don't know if they're as useful as something like UWorld, to be perfectly frank. I think the comprehensive exams would be, it's definitely worth doing. Again, mind you, preferentially doing the UWorld assessments, like we mentioned. But the subject exams can get a little bit more in a little bit too far in the minutia for the big board prep. So I personally, actually don't know of anyone who's done that before, but I'm sure it's something that's out there. I haven't seen it or heard of someone doing that. Great. Have you guys? I'm curious.
No, same as well.
Yeah.
So when I think of those MBME exams, I think of them preparing just for the shelf exams.
Yeah.
The next question is, for clerkship, what is the ideal timeline to have the text, question bank, et cetera, completed by? So, for example, in an 8-week clerkship. And the answer to that is as much of it as you can by the time you get to the end. And so if you're using 2 to 3 resources, I think it's unlikely that you'll get through all of them by the end of the clerkship. There just simply is not enough time. Like Lee had mentioned, 1,500 questions for medicine is a lot of questions. And in those 8 weeks, you have 1 day off a week. That's 8 days off. And then you probably get home at like 6 or 7 p.m. So you probably have an hour or 2 to study each evening. So your total amount of time is actually not much. And so you really want to prioritize and make sure that you're getting as much of it as you can get done. I don't think that anybody finishes reviewing their resources far prior to the exam. It's more like trying to get through as much as you can in that time. I'll give this one to you next, Lee. It's a question, there's a few questions, and they're all relating to timeline of Step 2 CK. So how long do you recommend your students study for Step 2 CK, and kind of dedicated timelines?
Sure. So I think Step 2 CK varies much more than Step 1 in that for Step 1, there's kind of like a minimum of amount of time that you want for dedicated study time. And, there's people can go up to like very long periods of time to study for Step 1. I do think that in general, the prep time for Step 2 CK can be a little bit shorter. It depends a lot on, I know a lot of people have schedules that are different. I also know that some people choose not to do completely dedicated study time and choose to do other things while they're studying for Step 2 CK. I would probably not recommend that. I think that having at least some dedicated study time is really critical. Because like nobody enjoys studying for an exam. So like, at least for me, if I had anything else that I could do to avoid it, I would. So I think that having dedicated study time is really critical. I would say for what I tell most of my students is that like a 4 to 6 week block is pretty good. If you really can't get that, then I would definitely not go below, I would say not go below 4 weeks, ideally 6 weeks, to get through all of those UWorld questions, to take some practice UWorld exams, and to make sure that you're using your other resources to really to review your other questions. You know, dedicated study time is such a beautiful thing after you've been through your clerkships, because, you know, like we've been saying this whole time, on clerkships, you have so little dedicated study time that I think that even if you did really well in your clerkships, that Step 2 CK really deserves to have some time dedicated to it. Because as we were saying, you know, people always say that Step 2 isn't as important as Step 1, and for sure Step 1 is very, very important. But as we've seen in this presentation, Step 2 is also really important, and you want to make sure you give it its due.
Yeah, I just want to second Lee as well. I mean, I think you really do want 4 to 6 weeks of dedicated study time. I think Step 1 is so hard. Everyone's like, oh, Step 2 is so much easier. It's still a really hard exam, and there's still a ton of information. And doing only 1 to 2 weeks of dedicated, or trying to juggle sub internships or electives while studying, does not usually end well. And so you really want to invest your time into making sure you take Step 2 CK once and you score as high as you can. And the best way to do that is to have 4 to 6 weeks of dedicated time. We're running out of time, but I have one last question. I'm going to give this one to Peter. Do you have any additional resources that you recommend specifically for COMLEX Level 2?
So for COMLEX Level 2, basically UWorld, simply, it's literally the same exact test. The only difference is that the osteopathic principles are much more high yield. So you definitely want to spend some time going back through the Savarese, the Green Book, which does all the OMM, and then look back through some law and ethics, because a lot of those like res ipsa loquitur and that stuff will show up. And don't forget about your random microbugs like bioterrorism and stuff, because that stuff will come back to haunt you if you don't look at it. Unlike the USMLE, where they don't really show up.
Great. Well, everyone, that concludes our session. That's the amount of time we have. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's kind of late for you on the East Coast, but we really enjoyed having you. You guys had some amazing questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but you're more than welcome to schedule a free phone consult with me. If you go to our website, you can go to the phone consultations and you can schedule 15 minutes to talk with me. I could try to address any of your individual questions or kind of ask any questions that you have about tutoring. Thank you, Lee and Peter, for spending some of your evening helping us. We really appreciate it. And take care, guys. Everyone, I hope you have an excellent evening. And if you need, you can find more information about us online. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.